Chapter 18. Although all Vronsky's inner life was absorbed in his passion, his external life unalterably and inevitably followed along the old accustomed lines of his social and regimental ties and interest. The interest of his regiment took an important place in Vronsky's life, both because he was fond of the regiment and because the regiment was fond of him. They were not only fond of Vronsky in his regiment, they respected him too, and were proud of him, proud that this man, with his immense wealth, his brilliant education and abilities, and the path open before him to every kind of success, distinction, and ambition, had disregarded all that, and of all the interest of life had the interest of his regiment and his comrades nearest to his heart. Vronsky was aware of his comrades' view of him, and, in addition to his liking for the life, he felt bound to keep up that reputation. It need not be said that he did not speak of his love to any of his comrades, nor did he betray his secret even in his wildest drinking bouts, though, indeed, he was never so drunk as to lose all control of himself. And he shut up any thought of his thoughtless comrades who attempted to allude to his connection. But in spite of that, his love was known to all the town. Everyone guessed with more or less confidence at his relations with Madame Karenina. The majority of the younger men envied him for just what was the most irksome factor in his love, the exalted position of Karenina, and the consequent publicity of their connection in society. The greater number of the young women who envied Anna and had long been weary of hearing her called virtuous rejoiced at the fulfillment of their predictions, and were only waiting for a decisive turn in public opinion to fall upon her with all the weight of their scorn. They were already making ready their handfuls of mud to fling at her when the right moment arrived. The greater number of the middle-aged people and certain great personages were displeased at the prospect of the impending scandal in society. Vronsky's mother, on hearing of his connection, was at first pleased at it, because nothing to her mind gave such a finishing touch to a brilliant young man as a liaison in the highest society. She was pleased, too, that Madame Karenina, who had so taken her fancy and had talked so much of her son, was, after all, just like all the other pretty and well-bred women, at least according to the Countess Vronskaya's ideas. But she had heard of late that her son had refused a position offered him of great importance to his career, simply in order to remain in the regiment, where he could be constantly seeing Madame Karenina. She learned that great personages were displeased with him on this account, and she changed her opinion. She was vexed, too, that from all she could learn of this connection, it was not that brilliant, graceful, worldly liaison, but a sort of desperate passion, so she was told, which might well lead him into imprudence. She had not seen him since his abrupt departure from Moscow, and she sent her elder son to bid him come to see her. The elder son, too, was displeased with his younger brother. He did not distinguish what sort of love his might be, big or little, passionate or passionless, lasting or passing. He kept a ballet girl himself, though he was the father of a family, so he was lenient in these matters. But he knew that this love affair was viewed with displeasure by those whom it was necessary to please, and therefore he did not approve of his brother's conduct. Besides the service and society, Vronsky had another great interest, horses. He was passionately fond of horses. That year races and a steeplechase had been arranged for the officers. Vronsky had put his name down, bought a thoroughbred English mare, and in spite of his love affair, he was looking forward to the races with intense, though reserved, excitement. These two passions did not interfere with one another. On the contrary, he needed occupation and distraction quite apart from his love, so as to recruit and rest himself from the violent emotions that agitated him. Chapter 19. On the day of the races at Krasny-Selo, Vronsky had come earlier than usual to eat beefsteak in the common mess room of his regiment. He had no need to be strict with himself, as he had very quickly been brought down to the required light weight, but he still had to avoid gaining flesh, and so he eschewed sweet dishes. He was only looking at the book to avoid conversation with the officers coming in and out. He was thinking of Anna's promise to see him that day after the races. But he had not seen her for 3 days, and as her husband had just returned from abroad, he did not know whether she would be able to meet him today or not, and he did not know how to find out. He had had his last interview with her at her cousin Betsy's summer villa. He visited the Karenin's summer villa as rarely as possible. Now he wanted to go there, and he pondered the question how to do it. Of course, I shall say Betsy has sent me to ask whether she's coming to the races, he decided, lifting his head up from the book, and as he vividly pictured the happiness of seeing her, his face lighted up. Send to my house. Tell them to have out the carriage and 3 horses as quick as they can, he said to the servant, who handed him the steak on a hot silver dish, and moving the dish up, he began eating. From the billiard room next door came the sound of balls knocking against each other, of talk and laughter. 2 officers appeared at the entrance door. One, a young fellow with a feeble, delicate face, who had lately joined the regiment from the Corps of Pages. The other, a plump elderly officer, with a bracelet on his wrist, and little eyes lost in fat. Vronsky glanced at them, frowned, and looking down at his book as though he had not noticed them, he proceeded to eat and read at the same time. "What? Fortifying yourself for your work?" said the plump officer, sitting down beside him. "As you see," responded Vronsky, knitting his brows, wiping his mouth, and not looking at the officer. "So you're not afraid of getting fat?" said the latter, turning a chair round for the young officer. "What?" said Vronsky angrily, making a face of disgust and showing his even teeth. "You're not afraid of getting fat?" "Waiter, sherry," said Vronsky, without replying, and moving the book to the other side of him, he went on reading. The plump officer took up the list of wines and turned to the young officer. "You choose what we're to drink," he said, handing him the card and looking at him. "Rhine wine, please," said the young officer, stealing a timid glance at Vronsky and trying to pull his scarcely visible mustache. Seeing that Vronsky did not turn round, the young officer got up. "Let's go into the billiard room," he said. The plump officer rose submissively, and they moved towards the door. At that moment there walked into the hall the tall and well-built Captain Yasmin. Nodding with an air of lofty contempt to the 2 officers, he went up to Vronsky. "Ah, here he is," he cried, bringing his big hand down heavily. Vronsky looked around angrily, but his face lighted up immediately with his characteristic expression of genial and manly serenity. "That's it, Alexei," said the captain in his loud baritone. "You must eat just a mouthful now, and drink only 1 tiny glass." "Oh, I'm not hungry." "There go the inseparables," Yasmin dropped, glancing sarcastically at the 2 officers who were at that instant leaving the room. And he bent his long legs, swathed in tight riding breeches, and sat down in the chair too low for him, so that his knees were cramped up at a sharp angle. "Why didn't you turn up at the Red Theater yesterday? Numerova wasn't so bad at all. Where were you?" "I was late at the Zverkoys," said Vronsky. "Ah," responded Yasmin. Yasmin, a gambler and a rake, Vronsky's greatest friend in the regiment was a man not merely without moral principles, but of wholly immoral principles. Vronsky liked him both for his exceptional physical strength, which he showed for the most part by being able to drink like a fish and do without sleep without being in the slightest degree affected by it, and for his great strength of character, which he showed in his relations with his comrades and superior officers, commanding both fear and respect, and also at cards, where he would play for tens of thousands, and however much he might have drunk, always with such skill and decision that he was reckoned the best player in the English club. Vronsky respected and liked Yasvin, particularly because he felt Yasvin liked him, not for his name and his money, but for himself. And of all men, he was the only one with whom Vronsky would like to speak of his love. He felt that Yasvin, in spite of his apparent contempt for every sort of feeling, was the only man who could, so he fancied, comprehend the intense passion which now filled his whole life. Moreover, he felt certain that Yasvin, as it was, took no delight in gossip and scandal, and interpreted his feeling rightly. That is to say, knew and believed that all this passion was not a jest, not a pastime, but something more serious and important. Vronsky had never spoken to him of his passion, but he was aware that he knew all about it, and that he put the right interpretation on it, and he was glad to see that in his eyes. "Ah, yes," he said, to the announcement that Vronsky had been at the Tverskoys'. And his black eyes shining, he plucked at his left mustache and began twisting it into his mouth, which was an unpleasant habit. "Well, and what did you do yesterday? Win anything?" asked Vronsky. 8,000, but 3 don't count. He won't pay up." "Oh, then you can afford to lose over me," said Vronsky, laughing. Yasvin had bet heavily on Vronsky in the races. "No chance of my losing. Mahotin's the only one that's risky." And the conversation passed to forecast of the coming race, the only thing Vronsky could think of just now. "Come along, I've finished," said Vronsky, and getting up he went to the door. Yasvin got up too, stretching his long legs and his long back. "It's too early for me to dine, but I must have a drink. I'll come along directly." "Wine," he shouted in a rich voice that always rang out so loudly at drill and set the windows shaking now. "No, all right," he shouted again immediately after. "You're going home, so I'll go with you." And he walked out with Vronsky. Chapter 20. Vronsky was staying in a roomy, clean Finnish hut, divided into 2 by a partition. Petrisky lived with him in camp too. Petrisky was asleep when Vronsky and Yasvin came to the hut. "Get up, don't go on sleeping," said Yasvin, going behind the partition and giving Petrisky, who was lying with ruffled hair on his nose in the pillow, a prod on the shoulder. Petrisky jumped up suddenly on his knees and looked around. "Your brother's been here," he said to Vronsky. "He waked me up, darn him, and he said he'd look in again after you." After pulling up the rug, he flung himself back on the pillow. "Oh, shut up, Yasvin," he said, getting furious with Yasvin, who was pulling the rug off him. "Shut up." He turned over and opened his eyes. "You'd better tell me what to drink. Such a nasty taste in my mouth." "Brandy's better than anything," boomed Yasvin. "Tereshenko, brandy for your master, and cucumbers," he shouted, obviously taking pleasure in the sound of his own voice. "Brandy, you think?" queried Petrisky, blinking and rubbing his eyes. "And you'll drink something? All right, then, we'll have a drink together." "Vronsky, have a drink?" said Petrovsky, getting up and wrapping the tiger skin rug around him. He went to the door of the partition wall, raised his hands, and hummed in French. There was a king in Thule. Vronsky, will you have a drink? Oh, go on, said Vronsky, putting on the coat that the valet handed to him. Where are you off to? Asked Yavin. Oh, here are your 3 horses, he added, seeing the carriage drive up. To the stables, and I've got to see Bryansky, too, about the horses, said Vronsky. Vronsky had, as a fact, promised to call at Bryansky's, some 8 miles from Peterhof, and to bring him some money owing for some horses, and he hoped to have time to get that in, too. But his comrades were at once aware that he was not only going there. Petrovsky, still humming, winked and made a pout with his lips, as though he would say, Oh, yes, we know you're Bryansky. Mind you're not late, was Yasvin's only comment, and to change the conversation. How's my roan? Is he doing all right? He inquired, looking out the window at the middle of the 3 horses, which he had sold to Vronsky. Stop, cried Petrovsky to Vronsky as he was going out. Your brother left a letter and a note for you. Wait a bit. Where are they? Vronsky stopped. Well, where are they? Where are they? That's just the question, said Petrovsky solemnly, moving his forefinger upwards from his nose. Oh, come on, tell me. This is silly, said Vronsky, smiling. I have not lighted the fire. It's here somewhere about. Come, enough fooling around. Where's the letter? No, I've forgotten already. Or was it a dream? Wait a bit. But what's the use of getting in a rage? If you'd drunk 4 bottles yesterday as I did, you'd forget where you were lying yourself. Wait a bit, I'll remember. Petrovsky went behind the partition and lay down on his bed. Wait a bit. This is how I was lying, and this is how he was standing. Yes, here it is. And Petrovsky pulled out a letter from under the mattress, where he had hidden it. Vronsky took the letter and his brother's note. It was the letter he was expecting, from his mother, reproaching him for not having been to see her, and the note was from his brother, to say that he must have a little talk with him. Vronsky knew that it was all about the same thing. What business is it of theirs, thought Vronsky, and crumpling up the letters he thrust them between the buttons of his coat so as to read them carefully on the road. In the porch of the hut he was met by 2 officers, one of his regiment and one of another. Vronsky's quarters were always a meeting place for all the officers. Where are you off to? I must go to Peterhof. Has the mare come from Sarko? Yes, but I haven't seen her yet. They say Mehatan's gladiator is lame. Oh, that's nonsense. But however are you going to race in this mud? Said the other. Here are my saviors, cried Petrovsky, seeing them come in. Before him stood the orderly with a tray of brandy and salted cucumbers. Here's Yavin ordering me to drink a pick-me-up. Well, you did give it to us yesterday, said one of those who had come in. You didn't let us get a wink of sleep all night. Oh, didn't we make a pretty finish? Said Petrovsky. Volkov climbed out onto the roof and began telling us how sad he was. I said, let's have some music, the funeral march. He fairly dropped asleep on the roof over the funeral march. Drink it up. You must positively drink the brandy, and then seltzer water and a lot of lemon, said Yasvin, standing over Petrovsky like a mother making a child take medicine, and then a little champagne, just a small bottle. Come, there's some sense in that. Stop a bit, Vronsky. We'll all have a drink. No, goodbye to all of you. I'm not going to drink today. Why? Are you gaining weight? All right, then we'll do it alone. Give us the seltzer water and the lemon. Vronsky, shouted someone when he was already outside. Well? You better get your hair cut. It'll weigh you down. especially at the top. Vronsky was, in fact, beginning prematurely to get a little bald. He laughed happily, showing his even teeth, and pulling his cap over the thin place. He went out and got into his carriage. "To the stables," he said, and was just pulling out the letters to read them through, but he thought better of it, and put off reading them so as not to distract his attention before looking at the mare. "I'll read them later."